All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us to kick off both our 2025 Programming and Connect Plus Forum today. I'm Sindhu Lakshanan, SVP of Development Services at OFN, and I'm going to start with some housekeeping tips and an overview of this year's forum before we transition into today's conversation on moving beyond the buzzwords to build a tech-ready culture. So we go to the next slide. In terms of housekeeping, we are recording this webinar. So the recording will be available to view on demand within the next week on CDFI Connect and our YouTube channel. We also encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourselves, share comments, and interact with other attendees. We've also allotted about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for audience questions. So we'll collect questions as we receive them in the chat in the Q&A box, and we'll respond to them in the dedicated Q&A portion of today's conversation. We can go to the next slide. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsor. This webinar and all of this year's Connect Plus Forum programming was developed with support from our wonderful partners at the City Foundation, with the intention of helping build and facilitate access to tools, skills, and expertise that will help CDFIs and other mission-driven lenders more effectively meet their missions. We head to the next slide, please. So for those who are new to us, the Connect Plus Forum is OFN's annual virtual event for the industry that is focused on delivering action-oriented conversations on pressing topics in our members' work. So this year's theme is CDFIs and technology. The technological breakthroughs of recent years are transforming every industry, and community development is no exception. In our rapidly shifting landscape, it's more important than ever that our industry harnesses technology to maximize our efficiency, organizational resilience, and our community impact. However, emerging technologies like AI and automation also carry considerable risks, perpetuating bias, threatening privacy, and deepening existing disparities that can harm the very communities that we work and partner with and serve. We also know that alongside the opportunities, there are pain points and challenges associated with leveraging and integrating technology. We recently did a member survey to get a sense of how members are using and interacting technology to help inform our programming, including this forum, that received over 150 responses. So of those, only 8% of respondents said they were very satisfied with how their organization uses technology to support their work. 56% were in the middle, somewhat satisfied or neutral. A third, 35% of respondents, expressed some level of dissatisfaction, either somewhat or very dissatisfied regarding how their org uses tech. Over the next few weeks, we'll dig deeper into these issues to explore the role of technology in our field and within our organizations. From emerging trends to the nuts and bolts of systems implementation in a fresh new format driven by our members' feedback. So instead of delivering our content in one afternoon, we'll now be delivering the forum programming over the next few weeks in the form of 4 webinars and 2 member-only office hour sessions, as you can see on the slide here. Our goal is that through these sessions, you'll come away with new perspectives and actionable strategies for integrating tech into your work. And then as part of the forum recap in February, we'll also be sharing new resources, tools, and templates that you can utilize to build on the concepts and topics that we've raised during the forum. If we go to the next slide, we'll transition to today's conversation, which is focused on laying a foundation for the rest of the forum. So I'm really excited to welcome Amy Sample-Ward, who's the CEO of N10, Brad McConnell, CEO of Allies for Community Business, and Carla Rensselaer, Senior Management of Small Business Research at FinReg Lab. To explore key trends shaping the future of our industry and how to turn them into opportunities for growth, equity, and agility by building a tech-ready culture. So to get us started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to provide some brief context on what their organization does, starting with Carla.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. So FinReg Lab is a nonprofit research organization based in DC, and we focus on advancing safe and responsible uses of data and technology in financial services with a lens on financial inclusion. So for context, over the last 2 years, we've been leading research with CDFIs, including with Brad's organization on technology in small business microlending to extend credit to underserved entrepreneurs.
Thanks. We'll go to Amy next.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited for the conversation today. I'm Amy Sample-Ward. I use they, them. I'm N10's CEO. I'm personally based out in Clackamas Land, Portland, Oregon, but N10 is a capacity building organization that has no office, has no geographic focus or boundary, and works with a global community of folks interested in using technology equitably and strategically to meet their missions and build a better world. We have a number of training programs, cohort programs, research lots of things, and I'll try to share links to anything I talk about specifically so that you don't have to dig through the website to find it.
Thanks, Amy. And then Brad.
Good afternoon from Chicago, everyone. Allies for Community Business mission is to provide the capital and the coaching and the connections that entrepreneurs need to grow great businesses that create jobs and wealth in our communities. We provided over $1 billion in grants and loans since our founding in 1994, but over 3/4 of that, $750 million, we've provided since 2020, since the pandemic began. We do that through a combination of grant making and lending across term loans, lines of credit, and revenue-based financing. Complement all of that with one-on-one and group coaching, all of which is always free. And they recognize that our team of 40 based in Chicago, serving all of Illinois and Indiana, can't do it all. And so we try to make connections wherever we can to other things that entrepreneurs would value. And so part of what we're looking to do today is to find other people who are like-minded like us in order to continue to make connections for our staff and for eventually the people that we serve so that there are more resources available than otherwise.
So I'm really excited to have this group here today to kick off our forum. And we're going to start by talking about big picture trends. And so Carla, AI and big data are major buzzwords today. And so from your perspective, which technologies and tech trends are shaping or have the most potential to shape the future of the community development and nonprofit sectors?
Sure. Yeah. So I feel like whenever anyone starts a conversation about AI, we should start with maybe just a little bit of definition. So I'll just do that briefly, and then I can go into the trends that FinReg Lab has been monitoring. So I think on a very broad level, artificial intelligence just refers to any instance of using computers to do something that would have historically required a human, like learning or problem solving or decision making or understanding language. But when people use AI nowadays colloquially, they're often talking about generative AI, so something like a chat GPT that produces original text or images or even code using patterns learned from data. And it does that in a way that uses kind of natural language processing so that humans can interact with the interface of the AI in a more natural way. And I know we've talked a little bit about machine learning as well and big data. So machine learning is really just a tool that is used as part of AI. It's really in teaching computers to learn and improve on data in an iterative way to identify patterns really effectively. And I think machine learning is a concept that sounds really complex, but it's actually already being used in a lot of places all over the financial services sector. And it can be used to kind of explain something that's already happened or predict something that might be about to happen. And then just big data refers to just very large data sets that are often produced through the new kind of digital ways that we interact with companies and products and services. And big data is often what's used to train AIs and machine learning models. And so in terms of where FinReg Lab and I see the greatest potential here, a lot of these tools that have been used, like machine learning for predictive analytics or portfolio monitoring, or AI to detect fraud instances, have been used in financial services by larger institutions. And now we're kind of seeing the adoption of these technologies by CDFIs and other non-traditional lenders that are more focused on reaching underserved communities, which creates the potential to gain operating efficiencies, but also to accelerate financial inclusion, because some of these larger models have the ability to find patterns or trends in assessing someone's creditworthiness or ability to repay a loan, more so than traditional underwriting could. And then one other trend I'll just mention that FinReg Lab has been very focused on is open banking. So we've seen a lot of growth in digital banking and open sharing of financial data, especially since the pandemic. And that offers the opportunity to create new products and services that are really tailored to someone's unique financial needs, more so than the data just being owned by large financial institutions.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks for providing those definitions. Like oftentimes, like people are throwing this terminology around and you're just like, well, what does it actually mean? I remember the first time I heard like what about Bitcoin, I was like, I have to go deep and like do a Google search and figure out what this actually is. And so Amy, very similarly, like from your perspective, you work with a lot of you're working with nonprofits every day. A lot of our members are nonprofits. What are you seeing from your end?
Yeah, maybe I'll just pick up where Carla was just speaking about AI, because I think we're hearing from a lot of folks the pressure or obligation to be talking about AI, but also it always comes with this question of do I have to talk about this? Because actually I have this other work to do, and we're often like the sad trombone in these technology conversations because we are not part of the hype train. No, if you do not have the capacity to think strategically about any technology topic, then you shouldn't just be randomly making a choice around it. I think that there is potential. I don't want to say no AI, period. There is a lot of potential for AI-enabled technologies to support our work. Carla mentioned a couple examples, but I think what we're seeing across the diversity of the nonprofit sector is that a lot of that potential is most meaningful when it's small, contained models built purposely within your organization to serve specific programmatic or service delivery related needs. And in order to do that, well, you better have some clean data. You better have some good systems, right? So instead of jumping right to AI or pressing, enable on the little AI magic wand inside your CRM, work first on making sure you have adequate and appropriate data policies. Your systems are set up to really learn from whatever you want to be learning from. Really get your own stuff in order before you're thinking about, okay, what can we do? How can we jump on this bandwagon? I think another place where we're seeing some focus or some trending across the sector is organizations really thinking about what structures or systems do we have in place that we could bring more community members into, because there is a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do to make the world we want, to run the programs we want. How could we get volunteers better positioned to support folks who maybe have been approved to be in a certain program or receive a certain service? How can we better learn from folks who've been in there and not just have a survey that was on a piece of paper and we put in a filing cabinet, right? But really have integrated technology systems so data's coming in, participants are able to access things and see in real time, whatever their information is. And that takes, we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, in the conversation, but that takes a really holistic strategic view of what your technology investments are and how they relate to the work that you're doing.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's not moving, really moving beyond those buzzwords, right? You might hear AI just because everyone's talking about it doesn't mean necessarily that it's right for you. And with that, Brad, as a CDFI leader and practitioner, which of these trends do you think CDFI should be paying most attention to? And what's most interesting to you right now?
Yeah, two different questions, which deserve two different answers, I think. Broadly, I don't have a whole lot of time for solutions in search of problems. And instead, I think it's much wiser, humbly in my view, for organizations to focus on what are the business problems that we need to solve today, tomorrow, and in the medium term. And then think through, are there available technologies, either mature or emerging, that will help us to solve that problem? Or alternatively, explore that opportunity, if it might be that. So specifically for us at the moment, at Allies for Community Business, our, I'll call it an obsession, my obsession, is to create the greatest experience we possibly can for the entrepreneurs that we serve, particularly in the diverse communities that typically have been provided with pretty lousy experiences when they're seeking financial services or other similar supports. And so along with that, there are a lot of technological implications about how to create, deliver, and maintain such a high quality experience for those who may or may not be tech savvy at all. So we're thinking about, amongst all the things that we've talked about here so far, across what Carla and Amy had mentioned, most importantly, thinking about how to integrate open data sources in a way that allow us to make it such that entrepreneurs have to give us nothing but an ID in order for us to evaluate them for credit, for coaching, for grants, and for other services. We'll go consume all the other data from all the other places we know we can get it in a really sort of real-time, high quality, highly secure manner. And that type of kind of open integration is far more valuable to us than a lot of the other things that are percolating in the technology marketplace at the moment.
Can I lift up something that Brad just said? Thinking back to the title of Going Beyond Buzzwords, I really appreciate, Brad, that you said this and want to like color highlighter all over it. And that is letting go of what we've kind of consumed through marketing, that these technology products are solutions. The solutions are our programs, our services, the experiences that Allies for Community Businesses are creating, right? Those are the solutions to problems that exist in the world and in our communities. Technology tools cannot be seen as our solutions. Otherwise, we will kind of bend our missions to stay relevant to a random tool, right? We need technology to work for us. And that comes even in these conversations, just as Brad said, like, these are not the solutions. We don't need to figure out how could we possibly adopt this tool. No, is that tool right for our toolbox? Is it right for this project we have and we need this whole array of resources? Great, put it in the box along with many others, but don't bend your work to fit some other product.
Absolutely. About like, it's like focus on meeting mission, right? Which is a great segue to what I was going to ask you next, actually, Amy, and then Brad and Carla. And so like, how can organizations really ensure that technology is advancing their mission, right? Like, how do you ensure that like when you're taking these, you're using them as a tool and that you're avoiding unintended consequences, which might look like increasing inequity for communities that already have limited digital literacy or broadband access?
Well, I'm glad that we've all signed up to be here for 8 hours because this answer is very long. Let us start at the beginning. No, I'll try and keep it brief, but NTEN's work in looking at, how do organizations of all different types and sizes use technology to really meet their mission? How can they be effective with technology? We've been doing this research for 25 years, and I think an important note before I share some of these practices around technology culture is that we don't see any correlation by budget. You are not more effective simply because you have more money. You are also not more effective simply because you have more staff. There are very small organizations doing things in the way that make them really effective, and there are giant organizations making bad decisions, right? So don't feel like you need to opt out because you're seeing all these intros and you're like, gosh, we're one of the smallest orgs on this webinar. No, it actually isn't about that. Instead, what we've seen consistently through all these years of our research is a number of practices that are highly correlated to effectiveness. You could like implement tomorrow or commit to implementing tomorrow. One is that you can articulate technology in your strategic plan. That document that's guiding so many of your partnerships that you're using and telling your staff, this is the direction forward. If that kind of guiding star strategic document can't name why you're investing in certain technology or building up your data infrastructure or whatever, then you're kind of sending the message that whatever you are doing with technology isn't strategic, and you're not bringing it back to the mission. Similarly, whoever on your team is a tech decision maker, regardless of their title or the structure of your teams, but whoever's making decisions around technology is considered part of the leadership team and is part of strategic conversation so that they are able to surface in the moment connections or opportunities or risks when those bigger conversations are happening. It's also around how organizations are budgeting for technology. Despite it being 2025 now, welcome, Happy New Year. We see so many organizations, including very large, 100-year-old organizations budgeting for technology in the same, line item as pencils and Post-it notes and coffee, other office supplies. But if technology is in a shared kind of line item with these other office supplies, you can't evaluate what the ROI was on those bigger investments. You can't really understand fluctuations to that spending over time. So being able to budget for it in really itemized and clear ways is another piece of that correlation. And the last one I'll say here is that technology training is something that every staff person has access to year round. It is not part of onboarding and then like Godspeed to you, right? It is a part of the organization's commitment to technology, is making sure that staff know how to use the tools in ways that work for them. There's 5 different ways to run that report, I'm sure. Help them find the way to run the report that works for how they learn and how they need the information to come out of the system. So really building in a culture of training around technology, because I mean, we're going to close this and Zoom's going to tell us that Zoom is updated and there's a new version, right? Like these tools are changing all the time. So making sure we're committed to supporting staff using them effectively year round. And I'll put in the chat, but we actually a number of years ago took this annual research around practices and policies organizations have in technology and turned it into kind of a easy to use assessment tool that's totally free. You can use it anytime you want. That Tech Accelerate is, again, not product specific, but looking at these technology practices across your organization and then provides recommendations where maybe your risk is really high because your answer wasn't great, and resources to learn more about those topics. So easy tool if you or a colleague want to go check out where you're at.
Thanks so much for making this so actionable, Amy. And I will say that the Zoom thing is a very real pain point. We are in fact actually making that transition ourselves, where like we came back in the new year and it was like, all right, Zoom events, let's go, a whole new set of processes. And I was like, all right, we're all getting trained again. So Carla, this is something also that you come across as you've been kind of in your research, as you've been following organizations. What have you seen, or kind of what has come up in your own research and kind of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been looking at it a little more from kind of the lending aspect of CDFIs as the service they're providing. And what's interesting is a lot of times the traditional approaches that are used, kind of like what Brad was mentioning, trying to phase out, can actually have downsides in terms of financial inclusion. So requiring extensive, accountant prepared P&L documents and financial statements and many years of tax returns, and submitting all of that in person to someone can be a barrier for someone, especially smaller, younger businesses, which is what I study, but also just underserved consumers more broadly. And a lot of times it's those very consumers that are most sensitive to kind of the processing timelines as well. Somebody who needs a loan or capital right away, if it takes several weeks to fund using kind of non-tech driven processes, they're going to opt for a high cost loan that they can get online within a matter of days. And so technology actually allows for more flexible, faster products and services that meet the needs of many of the underserved communities that CDFIs are seeking to serve. And I think in terms of kind of the access question, there is always some risk that non-digital customers will be left out if you're totally automating all your processes or requiring plugins with other platforms that people might not have access to. And I think one thing we've seen is that the kind of limitations are sometimes overstated. So almost everyone these days has access to a phone with some kind of like internet capability. And so to the degree that you can make customer, loan applications or technical assistance and other services digitally friendly, it actually gives you the ability to serve more people than, if it was a long web-based application where they have to sit down at a computer, they might not have internet access. And then, of course, a lot of the CDFIs that we've been working with do maintain kind of dual systems. So even when they're implementing technology to create more standardized and automated processes, still having kind of a backup option for someone who really does need to submit paper statements, for example. And that just helps to continue kind of meeting customers where they are. it does have some downsides in the end in terms of kind of speed, and it can be costly to maintain multiple systems. So it's really important to have good documentation and clear rules about when you make those exceptions. And I think Amy mentioned data earlier, so making sure you're still collecting the same data that you would if it was a digital process, so that looking ahead, if you want to use that information to make decisions or become even more advanced in terms of the technology you're using, those kind of offline or manual processes aren't a barrier in the future.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and it's, I think what's really great about this is that, like, Amy, you're bringing the nonprofit side of just like organizationally what like our members and kind of community lenders should be thinking about. And then Carla, you're really talking about the lending side. And so Brad, you're doing both, right? As a CEO, as a CDFI leader, you're thinking about both of these aspects. And so what does this look like for you when you think about how you're using technology to meet your mission at Allies for Community Business?
Well, a couple things. One is that I think as we try to get the entirety of our team to contribute to the work that's required in order to create the most effective, and I use effective carefully because it's both efficient and sensitive to the entrepreneurs that we seek to serve, the most effective experience that we can create. It requires getting the balance right here between asking throughout our team really smart people to contribute to what we're designing and then to the testing and the deployment, while also acknowledging they also have a day job, which is what I'm expecting them to do, and hold them accountable to all of the goals that we've established for each element of our organization. So figuring out the right allocation of time is one of the most important things that we've tried to be really careful to get right. I think we've done okay, and it can absolutely get better and will need to get better over time in order to make sure that everyone is fully immersed in what we're trying to accomplish, which makes it more likely people have fully bought into what we're trying to accomplish. And also because the end result is just better, because we got a lot more insights from all of the talented and experienced people throughout our organization that we require in order to be able to create something that's really special, but also operate that over the course of time. So that's kind of the generalized picture. I think very specifically, we have a set of experiences that informed how we think about like what to do and in many cases what not to do. So back in 2021, January 2021, we decided to do all the following all at once, which, to be clear, I do not recommend. We did all of these. We launched a new brand, a new strategic plan, a new website, new credit policy, and a new loan origination system.
In a January too, in a brand new year, we had to change the number at the end, Brad?
In the middle of the pandemic when we're all working remotely and still trying to figure out how to just get like PDFs sent around with signatures on them. So there's a lot of good reasons why we did all of that, and a lot of cautionary tales as to why that's, maybe a little aggressive in retrospect. But part of what we learned from that experience is that this allocation of time across the different initiatives that are really important here gets really tricky. And the minute that people start to feel overwhelmed by all the change because they're being drawn so far away from what they're there to do, what the job description says that they're supposed to be doing, is the kind of tip of when you start to lose the enthusiasm and the effectiveness of the technology implementation that is at hand. On the other hand, if we're doing everything so incrementally and it takes years and years and years and years to accomplish everything that we set out to achieve in that strategic plan that we launched in the beginning of 2021, then that feeling of drift, that sense of inertia, ends up becoming just as counterproductive as doing too much too fast. So culturally and sort of tactically, getting that balance right is really hard, but essential anytime that any technology implementation is being conceived of and then executed thereafter.
And that's a really great point. I mean, like about like the culture that you've had to build in order to get this right for your organization. And so actually I'm gonna start with Amy here. So at N10, you support organizations, right, with a lot of resources and training to change their approach to technology. So what does it mean to build that tech-ready culture? Like if we take a step back, what Brad's describing is a really like a culture that's been prepared and that he's built and that the organization has built in order to really to implement technology well. But what for organizations who are trying to build that culture, who are thinking about what that looks like, can you talk us through that? And also, I like fully acknowledge that tech-ready culture is a buzzword in and of itself. So
long as we're not talking about digital transformation, I'm good with tech ready culture. And
Yeah,
I really, Brad, I appreciate that you shared that story, because I bet there were a lot of people nodding off screen as you were sharing that story. I think that there's a lot of different kind of practical tips or lessons learned that we could all share about building up that tech ready culture. But I think a few to highlight. One is that I said at the very beginning, technology is accountable to us. So we don't need to say, oh gosh, like we bought this random system, so we need to change what data we now collect on people because we don't know how to get that to work in this system. Nope, not the best system, right? These tools need to bend to our service needs, our program needs, our staff needs, our community needs. And that's okay to say that this, this certain tool isn't right for us. And I think there's sometimes some feeling of pressure that, well, if we already invested in this, like, we better use it for X number of years to have it be worth it. But if it is holding back your program effectiveness, your mission, your services, well, then why would you keep holding those back just to say, well, we paid a bunch for this a few years ago, right? And letting go of that as the value you're trying to measure against. I think it's important to think about technology accessibility for your staff. Like I mentioned before, there's probably 5 ways to run that report. There doesn't have to be one same path through every system that every staff uses, so long as we're getting the data in to complete the application, right? Or we're making sure that we're all making decisions from the same types of data across the team. But there's different ways. There are different ways we learn. There's different ways we think. There's different ways that might spark a new idea about how to improve the experience, of your program. So making sure that we're committed to the accessibility needs of our staff, not just like web accessibility standards, but really like, do you want to use a mouse or do you want to use the tab button? Like, even some of these pieces of how do you want to use these tools can help how we set them up. To Brad's point, even if you're launching a whole new system, making sure that staff have had input into that process before it is launched to say, hey, I really can't stand looking at a pie chart. Give me any other chart, but don't make it a pie chart, right? So that you've turned on different display options for staff to choose the chart that works for them, right? It feels small and like a tactical detail you could figure out later, but it makes a huge difference for adoption and for the speed of staff trusting this new system. I can put in the chat a link to nope, that's not it. We have our community created with us an equity guide around technology that speaks to both using and adopting tools, but also how you invest in them and how you create them. So there's lots of kind of directional guidance in there to think about building a tech culture in your organization that feels equitable to everyone, but also accessible and something that folks can be effective with.
Thank you. And then Carla, on the other side, like you've been kind of like FinReg Lab has been working really closely with CDFIs like Allies for Community Business and other mission-driven lenders to like test and build new tech-driven lending programs. And so from your perspective, what's helping these orgs kind of build that culture, and what can organizations do to successfully prepare for these like different changes that are coming and these trends culturally?
Absolutely. Well, Brad's doing everything wrong. Just kidding. He's actually way ahead of the curve. No, Brad's doing great. But I mean, this has been said already. So technology just is not a silver bullet, and it's often positioned and marketed as that. But it's really a tool to support your organization's mission. And so I think the challenge is sometimes people put the technology before the kind of strategic planning, and really it all needs to kind of like feed from where the organization wants to be in 5 years and 10 years, and enabling the technology that will help you get there, whether that is, to grow in scale, to reach more people, whether it's having deeper engagement with your customers, whether it's reaching specific communities, or just having more efficiency and processing your applications faster when it comes to lending. And so starting with the mission and really thinking about the tools that will help get you there. The other piece is it's not a one-time process. I'm sure Amy can speak to this as well, but it's kind of this continuous cycle of evaluating what's working and what's not working, and often it can be incremental. So you don't have to override all your systems at once and kind of adopt a bunch of new platforms. You can test and learn and have kind of a feedback cycle so that you can also, reevaluate if something is not working. And that also involves kind of thinking ahead to where the organization might be. So does this technology currently support, let's say, like 100 loans a year, but you actually want to get to 1,000 loans a year? What technology will work for that and what won't? And where might your processes need to be reevaluated to get that to work for everyone? And then I think the people, which has already been mentioned as well, but really it's not like one person and now 25% of their time is going to be becoming the tech champion for the whole organization. It needs to be a process where every team will interact with this technology in some form, even if, they might not be using it directly, but the data that they produce has to get fed into it. Or when they interact with a client, they need to, get the information from a different team. And so I think the most effective examples we've seen have been leaders that communicate with every single team around the organization and kind of understand the touch points that they have with various pieces of information and the way that the technology might impact that. And so it's just really important to have it be kind of have champions within each team and that they see their own work reflected in that as well. And then I think hiring, we're going to get to resourcing next, but it can be really difficult to hire tech-specific roles. And so we've seen organizations that kind of repurpose certain staff to take on more technical roles, whether it's product or kind of technology vendor management. And that can be really helpful as long as, like Brad said, you're kind of making sure that the job description is clear and you're not expecting someone to take on all this work on top of their regular role. And so where you can, hiring really dedicated tech staff is actually usually the better way to go.
Just add one more word on culture. I think I've made the mistake in the past of almost treating like preparation for and then execution of a technology implementation with our people as though the preparation work, the cultural work, is an item on a to-do list that can be completed. That's wrong, I think, based on my own experience of learning the hard way over and over and over again. It's never done, nor in my view should like technology be like the point. The idea here, I think, should be that we should create a culture in our organization of continuous improvement that never ends. We should always be looking to find more entrepreneurs to serve in the communities that are underserved and to get better and better and better over time at serving them well. It so happens that part of the way in which we can do that is by deploying technology really smartly. But there's so much more to it than that I try not to over-focus on the fact that we need to be kind of tech savvy, tech ready, whatever you want to call it, right? The culture has to be about always getting better because the mission is important enough to deserve that degree of just incessant improvement in what we're trying to do, because that means that we'll serve our mission better. We'll help more people, generate more wealth in the communities that we care about. Technology is a helpful means to that end, but it's not the center of the work in any way.
I love that so much, Brad, and want to name that I think, I'm not saying you do this, but I think we've seen across all different types of nonprofits, sometimes folks have or are starting towards the vision you're sharing, which I couldn't agree with more, but then they kind of fall down on how to meet that vision. And it's because they think they're still evaluating technology in a little bubble, and then they're evaluating programs without thinking about the technology that supports them. And so when you separate the evaluation, well, then you're going to look and say, okay, well, does this tool still allow for all the fields we need in the application intake? Check. Does it still do this? Yeah. oh, okay, well, so it looks like we should still be using it. And then you go over here and you're like, how do we serve more entrepreneurs? How do we get more folks in, right? And then you think of it only as like the program staff doing more somehow of what they're doing, and thinking about our impact evaluation, our program evaluation, service evaluation, technology is a component of what we're evaluating within that, so that we continue to keep it tied to us doing that great work and expanding our great work and being able to achieve more, and not the checkbox of like, oh yeah, does it still work over here? Okay, great. Because then you'll just keep using it when it isn't tied to these bigger mission imperatives.
Yeah, and I think what you're both raising is really, it's like that mindset shift, right? It's just like, how do you kind of like stop? And I think, Brad, you've raised this kind of when we've talked previously about, it's like, you know, technology isn't, like you were saying, that kind of item that you check off, but how it to become a part of your day to day as something that helps you do your job more effectively and your work more effectively, to kind of the point that you were all making earlier about like meeting mission, right? Like this is about kind of like how we ultimately are able to, as Brad, we pointed out, serve our clients at the end of the day really well. And I think to go back to that journey, Brad, of like, just like you started kind of like all this stuff in 2021, I think it's just helpful for a lot of like members on the call or kind of like other CDFIs to just get deeper into that journey. Like, how did you just like, how did that start, right? Like, how did you decide to do kind of like, what set you on this path of thinking that you needed like all of these changes and like really needing to kind of like think about how technology is integrated at your organization? And then can you like highlight some of those key points in your journey that's like shaped where you've landed today?
Yes, a very long story, which I will do in about 2 minutes. We had very specific deadlines that we had to meet related to brand and program deployment, where we had on the program side very large grant distributions coming on the order of $250 million. And we very much wanted for that massive number of entrepreneurs who were going to be serving, and most of which would be introduced to us for the first time, to have an experience with us that they would remember, that then we can use to continue to serve them well over the longer term, and they can tell their friends and so forth. And so we thought that we had a very specific moment in time that we needed to make an investment before we launched into that and then subsequent programs thereafter. So all of that and more made it such that it made sense in that moment in time, unlike almost any other moment in time I can conceive of, to try to do all these things all at once. And I'll just be, you know, as blunt as I can be here, made every mistake you can make, probably, and I own nearly all of them, in trying to make sure that series of implementations worked effectively. But of the many things, I think we learned from that, and frankly, in previous lives when I was doing this kind of stuff before I got into this space. The first and foremost, I think, point that we learned from that is that success begets confidence, and small failures snowball. So even if there is an implementation plan that is an 18-month run, having celebrated successes all along the way at interim milestones gives people the feeling, because it's true, that we're getting there. May not feel like it every single minute of the day, but we're on the path here, notwithstanding the 1900 bugs we got to fix, all the kind of stuff, right? On the other hand, whenever we had like a really big, kind of classic valley of despair problem where a lot of people are really pissed off because the system's not doing what it's supposed to do, or something on the website, whatever it might be, it could be anything. I think doing the best we can to disaggregate the size of the problems into meaningful chunks and addressable chunks so that we can get back to solving, and less about, oh God, sort of dissolving in the confidence, will allow us to then to eventually get to where we need to go. So it's a mixture of having, in our experience, a very clear vision for the medium term that we're seeking to achieve, which is enabled by technology plus process plus people, but in no means like driven by. And at the same time, make sure that we're structuring the work so that there are moments to celebrate when they're appropriate. And that is in part the technology implementation moments, and in part the practices, the processes, the trainings, like those moments of knowledge transfer, which are on top of the technology, but kind of aside from it, are also moments of success to celebrate because people are now smarter and better equipped than they were yesterday. And we should make sure that everyone internalizes how important that really is, even if the next technology milestone isn't for another month or something like that. So thinking about that journey that way in its discernible parts really helps to build the momentum of success and therefore the positive culture around the changes we're seeking to achieve.
Thanks so much, Fred. I will say, like, looking at you all today, I remember when we were talking, I was just like, well, it's a success. And you were like, well, you should ask, did it succeed? Because there were points at which you didn't think it was going to. And I mean, like, you can say that now, looking back, that you've kind of like been able to build what you've built, but that you had mentioned kind of like in year one, if I had asked you that, you're like, well, maybe not.
Yeah, and really, like I'll take it to like a very tangible end. So in year 3, we're in a position in which, unlike anything what we could have done before, we could, for some applicants, give them an offer for a loan while they're on screen after a 8 to 10 minute application. We could never do that before because we needed to go through all of the uploaded documents, which we don't want to do anything with anymore. So like I want to get into like our own technology, our own credit policy and so forth. A4cb.org explains all of that if you're interested, especially a4cb.org/loans. But the nut of it is really that we are in a position now where we can serve people very quickly to compete with the very fast, extortionately priced, sort of highly hidden fees in costly merchant cash advance type lending that's available online that people can get and they don't realize how expensive it is. That's our competition. And we need to be competitive on that basis in order to make sure that people are borrowing from us rather than those other options in order to fulfill our mission. And so we're now able to do that, I think, reasonably competitively, even though we're constantly trying to figure out how to be smarter about that and to help people who are looking for something different that's not fast, because we need to help them too. And they may not be tech savvy. They may need to come in the office to work with us. That's fine. Like we'll work with anybody, anytime, in any way, so long as we're using a similar sort of streamlined process, even if it's sort of handheld by our staff alongside the entrepreneur. So all of that feeds into thinking about like a tangibly successful path that we'll eventually got to and will continue to pursue, even though it didn't feel like that in the beginning.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment just to celebrate like what a big success that is, because that's really amazing. That's awesome. And I will say, I think for anyone like who's been like following the Fed Small Business Credit Survey, that tracks kind of like where people are going in terms of like lending. This is what you were mentioning, Carla, before at the top of the conversation around like what the trends and challenges, opportunities are. It's like a lot of our like small business owners and entrepreneurs are turning to kind of like easy online lenders, right? Who can get them a decision quickly that do have an impact, right? Because they often can be predatory. Not all the time, but they are. And then like, you know, that there's impacts there. And so how are we kind of like able to serve our communities more effectively to kind of be competitive, like you've just mentioned? And I want to kind of like, before we kind of transition to like we're already coming up on the end of the webinar. And so before we do, I want to dig deeper into a few more of the challenges. And so one thing we know is that CDFIs are often resource constrained. And so how can smaller or resource limited organizations really kind of think about their technology, right? Like how should they strategically approach this technology adoption? And I think, Amy, you've kind of stated this up front, where like, you know, that's such a great data point where like like your budget doesn't matter, like your balance sheet shouldn't impact how effective you are. But can you go deeper in that? Because I know that's just like a perpetual challenge that we come up against.
Yeah, I mean, I shared some pieces earlier where we see effectiveness coming from these different practices. And I think one thing I wanted to highlight and go back to was Carla was talking about staffing. And I don't disagree with what Carla shared about where and when you can hiring dedicated staff that have a technology kind of strategic role. And it is 2025. There is no staff person who is not using technology. And we also know how easy it can be for a staff person to inadvertently make a technology decision for the whole organization because they pressed, I accept, yeah, let me use this tool right now, right? That's a whole technology adoption choice that was made by a random staff person, right? So I think it is really important, maybe as like a new year, new you, like do a little refresh on everybody on staff's whatever you use internally. Like if you still call them job descriptions at N10, we call them a task analysis when it's an internal, document. But make sure that every staff position names technology in that job description and to what degree they are responsible for using certain tools or, maybe not other tools, what decisions they have the authority to make around technology in their role. Are they part of a certain team or committee that maybe participates in that annual evaluation of the CRM or, whatever it might be? Because as we're thinking about whether it's a small staff or a small budget, if we're thinking that it's just like kind of inherently everyone's job, it's no one's job, right? We need to actually be explicit and clear with each other who needs to be in this decision, who needs to be in this meeting, who do I go to if I need support, and naming that in every single internal job description so that staff also feel like they have some imperative to come and say, hey, I am one of the core people using this tool. I want to say we need to reevaluate it. It's not working, right? They can be more of a champion without it feeling like it is, as we've said multiple times on the call today, something that people are trying to do on top of all the rest of their duties, like really integrate it into how every job is defined.
Thank you. And then Carla, I mean, like from your perspective, like what kind of are some of the barriers and challenges that organizations are facing and like what would you recommend there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of resources, we definitely see this as kind of a larger challenge for the CDFI community and the ecosystem in terms of how are funders supporting organizations in their technology use. So everyone wants to fund programs and things that have program impact. And I think there's this like false separation of technology being a cost and programs being an investment, but actually the technology helps you deliver your programs. And so that positioning has helped convince some funders to support this kind of work. It's also hard to get ongoing technology funding because everyone wants to fund a new platform or project the first year, and then there's ongoing, maintenance costs, and so there are some questions around kind of like how do you support your own technology use in the long term, and does that come internally from the organization, or do you have to keep fundraising for it? I think Brad mentioned at the beginning of the call, like community and learning from others is a really big tool as well. And that we've seen that a lot where the most successful CDFI leaders aren't like sitting in a box alone deciding which technology to use. They're actually calling their networks, asking other CDFIs what they've done. And there are a lot of intermediaries, like including OFN now, that are kind of helping CDFIs navigate which technologies, which vendors are most kind of friendly to the CDFI model, both in terms of pricing, but also in terms of like flexibility to data infrastructure and long-term contracting versus short-term contracting, and kind of understanding the complex ecosystem of grants and loans and all of the different things that CDFIs provide. And then I think there's kind of a tendency to solve for individual like efficiency pinches, like without thinking about the whole ecosystem of technology. And so it can be tempting to buy like the latest, newest, shiniest pitch that you've heard from a vendor, but actually going back and looking at what can you still get out of the technology you're using, because at the end of the day, like an Excel spreadsheet and a Word document is still technology. It's more about like where do you find efficiencies in how your technology, in how your people interact with your technology, and how your processes are represented in your technology. And I think I'll leave it at that.
One more word on one of those barriers that Carla just described. So let's say we've done all the right things in thinking through what is our strategic objectives here, what are the business problems we need to solve or the opportunities to pursue, and on that basis, what technology might be available to help us to meet those greater ends. But now you're still in the position of, okay, well, how am I going to figure out like which technology I'm going to go buy or lease, right? So my only recommendation here is to not think about the problem as though it's figuring out what technology to buy or rent. And instead, investigate the marketplace to try to figure out who can be a good business partner for you over the long term, who happens to provide technology that you need. And if you think about it that way, then you'll be setting yourself up, hopefully, at least more likely than not, for a long-term relationship through which you're going to continue to be able to work collaboratively with your technology provider or providers in a way that as your needs evolve, as your opportunities that you can pursue change, you can work with that technology provider to help you to facilitate the efficient means for which you can go after it or alternatively solve problems that arise you didn't know about when you first had it. And thinking about a long-term business relationship who happens to provide technology to you is a way to also be supportive of the technology provider, which means that you get more loyalty and more dedicated time because they're more tied to you. So that's a very different way to think about technology procurement relative to just going and finding the lowest cost option and then just figuring out based on whatever training and implementation assistance you might be able to procure. But I think it's a smarter and better way to go if you can find those kinds of options in the marketplace.
And if you're listening to what Brad's saying and thinking like, no technology provider would care about us, think about, but you're interested in what Brad's saying, think about going with 3 or 4 or 5 of your collaborative other organizations, maybe in other areas or whatever, and go as a whole team. That is maybe a way to have even more leverage in working with a new technology provider and saying, all of us are in if you can work with us in this way, right? So don't feel like what Brad's saying is too big or hard for you. Just get some friends and do it together.
And I'm so glad that you raised that point because it really is like that kind of long-term relationship and partnership. I think like when we were kind of like talking before this call, I was just like really focused on like who do you kind of work with, who are your partners, who are your friends in this journey, and your tech providers are kind of really a really core part of that. So we are almost at time actually, and so before we kind of take it to answer hopefully 1 or 2 audience questions, I'm going to ask you all to close out. And so like as we leave everyone in the audience, what's one step, just one, big or small, that you think leaders and practitioners listening today should take to help advance their organization's resilience and tech use? Carlo, if you want to go first.
Sure, I can jump in. I've mentioned processes a few times, and it's not going to sound very exciting, but starting with understanding and mapping out your organization's current processes and the places where your technology plays a role right now, and kind of thinking about where you want to make improvements or improve the experiences or the services that you're offering, and then thinking about the platforms or the solutions that can plug into that. Because if your processes are messy, then your data will be messy, which means your technology will be messy. And so in the end, you might have 5 platforms that are all not talking to each other, and it actually creates a lot more manual work. And so I would say start with the process and then look for the technology that can help.
Really contextualize technology as a tool in the same way that the building that you operate in is a tool. The partners that you have that you work with in order to pursue your mission is a tool. The donor networks that you have is a tool. The underlying infrastructure that you use is a tool. It's not better or more important than the other tools. It should be conceived of as an important tool in its own right, but on par with all the other things that you need in order to operate successfully. And in thinking about it that way, at least on the margin, might demystify what otherwise is kind of built up over time to make technology seem different and harder somehow. It's not. But it is a really important tool to be using smartly and effectively.
And really quickly, I would say not to make assumptions about how technology is being used or what technology needs staff have, but to actually ask. An truly anonymous survey to staff that says, what are your pain points? Go system by system. How is this working for you? What needs do you have? What do you wish you could do with technology in your job that you don't feel like you're able to do right now? And I know so many folks push back and say, but we don't want it to be anonymous because then we can't help what people say. But if it is anonymous, you're really creating some trust for staff to say openly what is or isn't working. And I think that's worth not knowing which person to follow up with, and instead to get some insights, including questions like, what tools are you using that are not officially our tools? Right? Then you could see, oh, okay, we got a security hole over here. We have 3 people using this random tool, right? So starting with a survey to really understand needs, pain points folks have, dreams that folks have, and then building training around that, building some maybe opportunities for non-anonymous ways for staff to get into a project team, and let's figure out, 5 people said this, let's figure out how to make that report, let's go do this, who wants to be in. So don't make assumptions, but create places for that feedback.
Thank you all so much. So we are at time. I saw some questions come in. So what we'll do is we'll answer any questions that we get. We'll touch base with the panelists and share some responses on CDFI Connect. So we encourage everyone to continue this conversation on CDFI Connect. It is not a one and done. We kind of have 3 more weeks of programming coming up. So if you were kind of like, there's a topic I want to get deeper into, chances are that we're probably having a conversation around it in the next few weeks. And so we hope you'll continue to join us. Thank you to Amy, Carla, Brad for your time, your experience, your expertise, and sharing that with all of our attendees today. For anyone who joined, thank you for joining. And we'll continue to see you in the kind of next upcoming sessions. So thank you all. Have a good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're at. All right. Bye.